Good afternoon all, welcome to the Wednesday webinar from the NEP, helping you get the most out of Microsoft 365 tools. Today we're revisiting Power Apps and demonstrating one developed by the Met for building pre- and post-charge case papers. Now, the ability to build customized apps to improve a particular area of business is part of the M365 stack. So if you think that this particular piece of work might benefit your force, you could develop an app yourselves, or even better, you could save yourself the time and expense and download this one from our solutions catalogue. These sessions are all about sharing, and that's what the solutions catalogue is there to facilitate. Any problems logging on to that, just drop us an email and we'll sort that out for you. Now, before I introduce our guests, let me remind you that this webinar will last just 30 minutes. It's recorded and will be available to watch again on our website later today. The Q&A is open, so please pop your questions in there and we'll get to them towards the end. So let's meet today's guest, who is PC Simon King from the MPS. Welcome very much. We're very grateful, Simon, for you joining us today. So please tell us about your role and all about your app.
Yeah, definitely. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Simon King. I'm a police officer with the Metropolitan Police. I work in the counter-terrorism digital innovations team, and amongst other things, we deal with Power Apps and Power Automate and a Power Platform in itself. To give you a bit of background about what I'm going to be speaking to you today about and what I'll be demonstrating is it's an app called MyCJ. It's an app which has been designed to help police officers on the front line and in admin roles to undertake some procedural, I guess, housekeeping when it comes to doing their case papers and putting everything into place and presenting everything to the Crown Prosecution Service when it comes to actually submitting the papers in itself. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pop my screen up. I'm going to start by giving you a little bit of background about what case papers are, how they affect the victims that we serve, and how and why they need to be correct and why there's been an issue in the past. So if I just pop my screen up. So historically, case papers have always been very difficult. I would say it's probably arguably from a procedural point of view, one of the most difficult aspects of policing. There are constant changes, legislation changes, and unfortunately what it then means is that we've got to keep on top of this type of thing. We have historically, like I say, it's always been very, very difficult. We needed to address this in a number of different ways. First and foremost, we needed to educate people. We needed to provide people with the tools that they needed to ensure they got the correct case papers done. Now, before I go into the app itself, which should hopefully be up on your screen at the moment, I'll just explain what case papers are to people who don't understand what they are. So when a police officer goes out and arrests somebody, they will put together things like witness statements. They'll put together things like evidence lists, witness lists, everything that goes along as part of the actual case. So the actual case evidence in itself. They will then submit that information to the Crown Prosecution Service, and then the Crown Prosecution Service will use that information to then go to court and present at the first hearing and try and secure a conviction of that person which we're prosecuting. It's always been very complex, always has been. I think it always will be. Like I mentioned earlier, procedurally, one of the most difficult parts for a police officer, especially for frontline police, and you're expected to undertake quite a lot of tasks already. And the way that we seek to try and resolve that is by teaching people how to actually complete these case files, what files they need to submit. So we've done some work on it. We've done some user interface groups about how they would most like to understand this information, which is to be given to them. And we very quickly broke down there were two different options, or there were two different issues which we needed to find a solution for. One, it was quite obvious that a lot of police officers weren't actually sure what they needed to put inside of the case papers. So what the documents they were writing out, what they need to include, they just weren't aware of what they needed to do. And secondly, they weren't aware of which case papers they need to submit as part of their case paper pack to be sent off to the CPS. So we seek to address both those issues. And we've built the MyCJ app, which does provide a solution to that. If I can just bring up my screen, there it is. So the app itself is split into two separate areas, key areas of interest, which I just mentioned a moment ago. We've got what goes in my case papers and what case file build do I need. So if I go into what goes into my case papers, this will load up a list of all the individual case papers which a police officer will be expected to complete. This is all run through SharePoint. This is all built in Power Apps. So things can be added to this, they can be taken out, they can be modified as they need to, and it's all dealt with remotely. So as soon as it's updated, it will be passed through to the front end of the app for the users. So we can look at an MG3, for example. An MG3 is a case paper which is used for the decision-making process. One that's sent off to a decision maker to decide whether or not that person should face charges or should be charged for that offence. It would include things like the rationale of the officer who's making that decision, and all the evidence that's been presented to the investigating officer in interview. It's quite an important document. It needs to be included. The Crown Prosecution Service use that, and along with what we call an MG5, to present that entire case in court and use it as a foundation for their evidence. So it's important we get it correct. Historically, we have seen people not fill it in correctly, and again, like I mentioned to begin with, that has had issues with cases being discontinued and victims essentially not been given the best service that we could have done. So by clicking into the MG3, we've got a little bit of information about what the MG3 is. We've got video as well. By clicking up here, we can play a video regarding the MG3 in this case. It's by police officers, for police officers. The myth-busting videos, they're designed for visual learners. So if there's a police officer who perhaps understands things better by watching a video, we've given that option by providing a video to them as well. Let's cross that off. What we also do as well is we go through every single section of an MG3. Now, a typical case paper can include dozens of sections, and one of the challenges as a police officer is making sure they fill in those sections correctly. It may sound trivial, it may sound very straightforward, but there are certain things which can be said in boxes or incorrect boxes which are filled in, which can have a huge impact on the case itself. Ultimately, what we're trying to avoid is getting it wrong, but the knock-on impact of getting it wrong is having the case discontinued, which again goes back to the original point of it would then be thrown out, and unfortunately that means that the victim isn't receiving the service that we want to provide to them. So we've gone through, by clicking into the sections, every single section and subsection, in this case on the MG3, and explained exactly what each individual part is there for. We didn't want to leave anything open to ambiguity. Some of them are very, very straightforward, but we've explained them anyway. For example, the number, which is the CRIS number, which is our crime reporting system. Everything is explained, so it gives the officer a real opportunity to go in and use this as an aid memoir. And by using it as an aid memoir, they can use it to reference their case papers as they're going through their case files and they're building it. They can ensure that they're up to a national file quality standard. We go through all the different sections here, other evidence, etc., etc. If I just go back to the case papers again, we have things like we'll use the MG6. The MG6, this doesn't have a video, so the banner isn't displayed at the top. Just a little bit of information about what the MG6 is. And again, we go into all the different sections of the MG6. If I provide one with a contextual example, so if I go to this, I'll go to the IMD, which is a new document. If I go into the sections here, what we've done here, we've brought in some contextual examples. So the IMD is a new document which has been released. It's an investigations management document. And the whole purpose of that is to document what you've done, the actions that you've taken, the results of those actions, and then provide that to the Crown Prosecution Service as essentially an overview of exactly everything that you've done. So the IMD came out, we started using it in January this year. I think officially it went into practice in April. And again, we've broken down all of the different sections that you would see normally on the case papers, but we've also provided contextual examples. And the reason we've added those as well is from the feedback from our users across the net, we have seen a lot of people who say, well, I understand the information you're giving to me, but I just don't know how to put it into practice. I don't know how to put it into writing and write it myself. So the MPCC and a CPS have some agreed gold standards, gold standard examples of what they would like to see in these IMDs and the other parts of the documents that they're sending off. And so we've included them here as well. Now, what this does is it allows an officer to go into there, read this information, digest the information, but then also look at a working example and then do a direct comparison to what they need to be writing. And that, again, provides a bit more of a visual learning aspect for officers who perhaps find that more beneficial. So that's the case papers broken down. That's the content of the case papers broken down, and that was a solution to that issue, or at least part of a solution to that issue. The second part of the app, which is the case file build. Now, arguably, this is one of the most important parts of the case paper journey for the officer. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, when an officer completes the case papers and they submit all of their information, and they need to put them on into their separate forms, so the MG3 and the MG6 and the IMD that we've just seen there, they need to then submit the correct forms, or they need to submit all the documents which are required to the Crown Prosecution Service. And it's very easy, very, very easy to get things wrong, not submit the correct ones, or submit blank documents, or whatever it may be. So very, very easy to do so. So we've built the case file build tool, which is essentially a case builder assistant. It supports both pre-charge and post-charge. And so pre-charge is when you've interviewed somebody, they're under arrest, or they may have been coming for a voluntary interview, and you want to get a charging decision. So you want to speak to a supervisor and present the evidence to that supervisor and say, this is what they've told me, have we got enough to charge that person for that offence? So that's pre-charge. Post-charge is after they've been charged, and the case files then need to go off to the Crown Prosecution Service in anticipation of a first hearing court date. So both have been issues. Post-charge in particular, we really want to get case file submissions correct. It needs to be right first time, every time. But pre-charge as well, the productivity issue of if we keep getting pre-charge case files incorrect, they go off, it then gets sent back to the redo, and then it goes around in a vicious circle, and the productivity wise, it becomes quite difficult. So we'll have a quick look at the pre-charge case file. For some people on the call who are aware of how the police judicial system works, this will be familiar to you. For others, I'll just quickly explain. A lot of these questions that are asked are pertinent to which set of case papers you need to submit. So that some of them appear a bit bizarre, but they are pertinent to which case papers need to be submitted to either the decision maker or the Crown Prosecution Service. So we'll click and just enter some of these. Your suspect in custody will say no in this example. Mode of trial, which is I suppose in a very brutal way of explaining, depends how serious the offence is. A summary on the offence is, up to a maximum of 12 months in prison. Indictable only would be things like murder, manslaughter, those type of high-end offences, if you like. We can select them manually here. So if the officer knows what the mode of trial is, they can select it manually, or we can use the lookup tool, which we've built. And we have a number of predefined offences that we've got in here. We use offensive weapons as an example. It will go off the SharePoint list. We'll click use this offence, and it will ping it back to the front end of the app, and it will populate that information for us. Anticipated plea, this is based on what they said in the interview, whether or not they're expected to plead guilty or not guilty, depending if it's been an admission of the offence or no admission or no comment and that type of thing. We'll put guilty in this, and then this will ask one of what we call the Annex 1 questions. So this will determine whether or not this needs to go off to the Crown Prosecution Service immediately for a decision, or whether or not we can do the decision, we can make the decision ourselves in-house. So we'll just click none of these apply to my case. go through the case file overview. And what this will do is it will present you a pre-charge case overview. So it'll be a bit of information about what you've input here with a build that you're going to be doing and where it must be submitted. If we go to the case file assistant, this will now bring up all of the case files. In this case, it's 6. All of the different case files that you must submit to the, in this case, the police. So that's the evidential review officer. So that will go off to them. Some you can see some are mandatory, some are mandatory conditionally, and it will again give you a bit of a breakdown. If I just go back to the pre-charge and do a slightly different one, it says suspect is in custody, mode of trial will say indictable only, anticipated plea will say not guilty. Again, it will generate the different pre-charge case overview here. If it goes to the case file assistant, it will bring up all the different files that you are required to submit to the Crown Prosecution Service in this case. Again, some are mandatory, some are mandatory conditionally. If I just give you a quick demo of the post-charge, which is slightly different. So post-charge is after they've been charged and we're sending all the documents to the Crown Prosecution Service. We'll say the suspect has been remanded in custody. We'll say the mode of trial is either way. It's going to be not guilty. The Crown Prosecution Service have said that it's not suitable for summary trial. And what that essentially means is that for either way offences, for lower end offences of a wide ranging scale, that can be dealt with in a magistrate's court. For higher end of the state, for example, shoplifting is still theft, but if somebody's stolen £50, that can be dealt with in magistrate's court as summary only. Whereas if they've stolen something worth, say, £5,000, that's probably more suitable to go to Crown Court. So go to the case file overview again, very similar to how the pre-charge one works, and is a slightly bit more information. And if we go to the case file assistant, and again, here we are, we bring up every single case paper, regardless of whether or not it's required or not. And that is to remove the ambiguity that we have of officers perhaps looking at a set of documents and thinking, do I need to send that? Because it doesn't say that I do, doesn't say that I don't need to send it off. So we've just included every single document and its requirement. Some are not required, some are required conditionally. That is the post-charge case file assistant. Is it worth me talking about the back end of the system for people who are interested through Power Apps? Do you think, Lorraine?
Yes, please, Simon, if you would, very briefly, though, because we've got a lot of questions coming in, but please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I know I'm wittering on, so I'll get it done. So what you see here is, so it's all based on, it's all through Power Apps. We use standard connectors here, which means this is all based on SharePoint lists. This is a test environment we've got to avoid sort of tampering with the live data. So it's not as aesthetically pleasing. But essentially, the way that we've set things up is we have all the offences listed here in our list. So we can add separate ones to it. So we can put in there as well as an example. Typical when the old internet's slowing down. We can put something in there like, I don't know, poaching, for example. We can say the mode of trial is either way. We'll say the gravity score is 4. We can save that, and that will then save into the system. So if I go back to the front end and run on start, which then goes off and collects that information, stores it locally. And by storing it locally, it means that you can use it offline if you're using the Power Apps app that is installed on Windows. This will now display in your pre-charge case file overview with your lookup. And so poaching should come up there somewhere. There we are. And poaching comes up there. So it's all remotely accessed. It's all completely and utterly managed through SharePoint. Things like the mode sorters, so the pre-charge and the post-charge stuff I was explaining, is all dealt with through this, almost like a matrix chart. To give you a bit of background on the actual decision-making process. So when I went through the pre-charge and a post-charge case builder tools, essentially, the reason it's always been very difficult is because there's so many decisions to make. There's so many different variables which change the overall outcome of the decisions. What this does by building this, and what this system does, the front end of it, is actually it makes, I think it's about 426 different decisions on behalf of the police officer using all the intelligence and everything that's behind it, and to route the officer through to the correct path. That's all set up through the SharePoint site. MG forms again, which is what we were saying, what I showed you before. There's all MG forms all in different lists, and again the same for subsection tables. For people who want to use this externally, I've included a app settings menu, which is very brief, but it essentially allows you to change some of the terminology that we use in the Met, so things like the case management team or the evidential review officer. You can change that, and that then saves into the app itself, so you don't need to go through and change hard code everywhere. Along with the support system that we have in place as well, you can turn videos off and also have maintenance mode. I should probably just very, very quickly show the little support system that we've got in place as well, actually, and I think that should pretty much cover it. So we're very keen to get people's feedback on it through the app within the Met. So if somebody wants to get in contact with us, we've got a little support system in place where they can send off some general feedback and submit it, and it comes through to our mailbox. And that, I think, pretty much covers it. I'm sorry if that was very quickly.
That's brilliant. So just share with us what some of the feedback has been. Yeah,
so very, very positive. So this went live in January this year to 3 trial boroughs. It very quickly was then sent out across the Met. And it's been incredible. We've not had anything like this before. What we've had historically are people who are very good at this, who would perhaps prepare a PDF document or a PowerPoint presentation and then email it out to everybody. It then gets disseminated to the various people across the Met, and unfortunately that becomes very, very old very, very quickly as guidance changes. So for people to say that it's great to have a centralized aspect to this, and it's very easy to use, it's very user friendly, very user intuitive. You know, I think the results will speak for themselves, which are due out in the next couple of weeks. But generally speaking, we're seeing about between 200 and 400 people a day using it, and that's 200 and 400 people, between 200 and 400 people a day who perhaps haven't had that level of direct support before. So yeah, it's really, really good. It's been generally very, very positive.
Well, it struck me as you were working your way through it that you'd have to be a pretty experienced officer to remember all of that and make sure that you've submitted all the correct documentation. So presumably for all the young members of your force just joining, young in service, that's going to be a real asset to to remind them of what they do need to submit.
Absolutely. And I think I mentioned at the beginning, I would argue that so there's two elements to the notification policing, and perhaps we need to do more on procedural policing, so things like completing case papers. And it's such a difficult task because it's so big and because it changes on such a regular basis. The officers who are younger in service don't necessarily have time to learn that straight away. They're expected to to pick it up straight away and almost become an expert at it immediately. This provides a stepping stone essentially between training school and what you learn on the streets, and it hopefully it plugs that gap which we have of providing that knowledge and that information, that experience, I guess, that we would have had from a police officer perhaps 10, 15, 20 years ago who's got all that years of experience. This plugs that gap which we no longer have, and it's been very, very positive as well from training school. It's now become part of the learning and development curve, if you like, through training school.
Excellent. Well, let's get to some of the questions. There's quite a lot of acronyms and abbreviations in them, so forgive me. I'll do my best to read them out correctly. So the first one is from Leah, who says, "Hi Simon, does your app split the files down further, i.e. beyond pre and post charge? So an MG9, for example, is needed post charge, but only NGAP files."
For NGAP files, yep. So on the actual case papers itself, we put emphasis on MG9 being a post charge. That can be changed. We can absolutely change things. We've got, when we first built this, there was a lot of emphasis on post charge case files, which is what the original scope of the project was. We absolutely can add more stuff to pre-charge if we want to explain some more about the MG9 for NGAP cases, that type of stuff. and it can be as granular as you like it to be. Ours is as granular as explaining what each sections are. But if somebody wanted to expand on that and perhaps explain in there and put some logic in place, which gives a bit more information to the user, that's absolutely possible. But as things stand at the moment, it tells us what the MG9 is, and it just explains what the MG9 is.
Okay, lovely. And we have a question now from Karen, who is asking, how does this work with TWIF, as we now complete a CM01 message and send CPS via niche rather than an MG3?
Yep, so the TWIF, the two-way interface, which essentially it works between the we use a system called Copper, which we use down here for our case papers, which is submitted to the CPS. This is not integrated with TWIF. Our Copper system, which is used to actually produce case papers, is what integrates with the TWIF. The MyCJ app is very much an aid memoir. It doesn't have any integrated logic with the TWIF or anything along those lines. It's just simply an aid memoir. That experienced PC that we no longer have, the MyCJ product is there to provide that information.
Okay, lovely. And we have one from Matt, who's saying, great product, how can I get hold of it? Does the Met have any plans to share? Well, yes, Matt, you can get hold of it through our solutions catalogue. I'll mention a bit more about that at the end. David's just popped it up into the feed there, but we'll talk a bit more about that towards the end. So Bernadette is now asking, how do you keep up with changes?
So there's somebody who's designated to look after this within the what we call MR10, our prosecutions unit. We have subject matter experts who have access to the admin interface through SharePoint, so they can update things. We've just seen the biggest set of changes, and that would be through the DG6 things, which came out earlier this year. But any changes are very, very easily made. If we need to add a line to perhaps one of the case papers, that can be very, very easily done within a matter of seconds. And then that's immediately sent through to the app. The app stores that information as soon as you go into it, so we don't need to worry about deploying new versions of it and all that type of thing. So very, very easily done. There are possibly things like people who use the DTF. This can be changed for people who use DTF as well. It's very, very easy to change.
So David from Essex Police is asking, is the logical next step to incorporate this app as a dynamic helper when completing all the various forms, so everything is completed in one process and an officer can return to a portfolio of completed or part completed and yet to complete forms, and then actually submit it all electronically direct to the CPS?
Probably not for this. We are moving across to a new system later on this year, which will replace our Copper system. So we're very specific in what the MyCJ product was for. It's not to say that it couldn't eventually replace something like that with some work. But we're very, very specific in that this is an aid memoir for officers. It's not there to replace the Copper system, which integrates to TWIF and all that type of thing. It's simply there for teaching and for helping and for giving those younger officers a bit of a help up where they need it. So absolutely possible, but I don't think on our cards for the time being.
Okay, smashing. There was just one question that I wanted to ask, is that how you shared this across the force. So once you developed this, how did you inform everybody about it and encourage the adoption?
Yeah, so it was sent out originally to all the criminal justice SPOCs. So everybody on each borough, each OCU has its own SPOC for criminal justice, sent out to them, and essentially they disseminated it. Ultimately, this makes their job easier as well. Things like pre-charge, they're continuously sending emails saying you need to ensure you include this form, you need to do that form, these are all wrong. So, to keep on top of things. So this makes their life a lot easier by having a centralized point of contact, if you like. So they're very, very keen to push it and to really, really drive it. Yeah, that's essentially it, really. Massive emails. We've done a bit of internal marketing, if you like. Had it featured on our intranet, and just basically just really drove the profile of it to get people in to use it. and yeah, all been well. They're really enjoying it.
Brilliant, Simon, thank you very much. And it's very generous of you to come on and demonstrate it to us, and even more generous that you sent it to us to share in our solutions catalogue, and you can see it there. People should have access to that. If you haven't, then just drop us a note to our generic email address, and we'll get back to you to make sure that you can get access to that. You'll find other solutions in the catalogue there as well, and if you've developed one within your force and you'd like to share it with others, please contact us, and that's a great repository for sharing amongst your colleagues across the country. Right, we've run over very slightly, so I'll say goodbye to everyone. Thanks, Simon, once again, and just remind you very quickly that next week we're going to be looking at Sway, which is a tool to help you create great presentations and newsletters. But in the meantime, have a great week, and we'll see you next Wednesday. Thanks, bye-bye.